I remember one chilly December night when I was just getting started in my career, pacing around a small apartment in New York, heart pounding, doubts weighing me down like a thick winter coat. Back then, the city could swallow you whole if you let it. The noise, the hustle, the relentless competition, it was all enough to make you question whether your dreams and your faith could coexist. I knelt by my bed, my hands clutching that apartment's worn-out carpet, and I prayed. It wasn't a fancy prayer. It was a simple one. Something along the lines of, "God, are you there? Are you really guiding me?" And in that moment, I felt the slightest shift in my spirit. It wasn't a miracle on the outside, no thunderbolts, no parted seas, but there was a calm in my heart, as if the entire room was softly whispering, "Yes, I'm here. Keep going." That single moment, that one instant of leaning on God's oversight, has stayed with me for decades. It taught me that acknowledging God's sovereignty is the gateway to unimaginable blessing. And so tonight, I stand before you wanting to share that same assurance. There is a mighty power watching over you, longing to open doors you couldn't even dream of, if only you keep acknowledging it. You might be sitting here, feeling overworked, overlooked, or overwhelmed, wondering where the next breakthrough is coming from. Or maybe you've reached a point where everything seems good on the surface, career humming along, family stable, but deep down, something's missing, a gap that achievement alone can't fill. We live in a world that tells us to hustle harder, reach higher, make things happen by our own grit and grind. And look, I am a big proponent of hard work, discipline, and determination. Let me tell you something I've learned over years of seeing life at every level, from living with almost nothing to living with what the world calls everything. Real, boundless blessing doesn't come from your resume. It doesn't come from the fleeting applause of others. It comes from the knowledge that you walk under the covering of a divine authority, that your steps are ordered by a God who sees it all, a God who cares. It's tempting to forget this truth. We get so wrapped up in the day-to-day grind that we fail to lift our heads and notice that someone far greater holds the map. If you're like me, you might have had moments where you think, "I've got this. I've worked hard. I've studied. I've put in the hours. Everything I have, I earned." That kind of pride can creep up on you quietly, making you believe you're the only architect of your destiny. But I'm here to tell you, there is a higher hand guiding, shaping, and sometimes even redirecting us for our own good. If we ignore that, if we don't pause to say, "Lord, I recognize you in this," we close the door on opportunities that only He can orchestrate. Now, as we gather here, I want to pose a question that might just change the course of your life if you take it seriously. What if the blessings you've been praying for, or wishing for, or even giving up on, have been waiting for you to shift your gaze upward? What if God's abundant grace, the kind that rolls in like a tidal wave and washes over every corner of your life, is actually standing on the other side of your faithful acknowledgement of His sovereign oversight? I challenge you tonight to consider that maybe, just maybe, the missing piece to your puzzle is a humble heart, fully aware of who's really in charge. I want to share what I've discovered in my own journey about how we can continually honor God's sovereignty and, in doing so, step into the stream of boundless blessings He has prepared for us. Over the years, I've learned this lesson through personal trials, through the lens of our youth, whose bright eyes and fragile hopes remind me of how much we all need guidance, and through family and business experiences that proved one simple fact. When we truly accept that God is in control, life becomes less about our limitations and more about His limitless possibility. Let's walk through these lessons together, and my hope is that by the end of this talk, you will feel a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper anchor in your faith, and a fire in your heart that says, "Yes, I see God's hand in my life, and I'm ready to follow wherever He leads." Time and time again, I've witnessed the tangible impact of trusting that God has His hand on the steering wheel. Some folks might ask, "Denzel, how do you actually see God at work in a career like yours? Isn't the entertainment business all about money, fame, and man-made success. The truth is, in an industry that can be so fixated on outward appearances, I found that keeping my eyes on God's guidance was not just a good idea. It was a lifeline. There was a season when scripts weren't coming my way. I worried if the industry had moved on, if people had forgotten about me, or if I had done something wrong. But through prayer and through constantly reminding myself that my career was in God's hands, doors opened that I couldn't have forced open if I tried. Unexpected phone calls, chance meetings, even roles that changed the trajectory of my life. They all emerged when I humbled myself enough to say, "Lord, you know better than I do." Have you ever felt that in your own life? One moment, you're stressing about where the next paycheck will come from. The next, you get a call out of the blue for an opportunity that lands squarely in your lap. You might call it coincidence. I call it divine timing. It's no accident. God's sovereign oversight doesn't always appear like a trumpet from the sky. Sometimes it's a gentle nudge, a timely conversation, an inexplicable sense of peace when everyone else is panicked. I've learned that these moments are not random. They're an invitation to recognize who's really in charge. I've spoken to many young people who tell me they feel lost. Lost in a culture that prizes instant success. Lost in a sea of social media comparisons, where someone else's highlight reel makes them question their own work. I see it in their eyes, that mixture of longing and desperation, a yearning to find a steady foundation in a constantly shifting world. And I always point them back to acknowledging God. You see, when you're young, you want to do everything at once. Change the world, make your mark, break free of your past. But if you skip the crucial step of anchoring yourself in divine guidance, you risk building your future on sinking sand. There's nothing more tragic than watching a young man or woman rise quickly, only to crumble under the weight of an identity built on applause rather than on truth. I met a bright college student once, let's call him Marcus, who had all the potential in the world. Honor roll, star athlete, beloved by his peers. But he confessed to me that every night he lay awake, consumed by fear that he wasn't enough. So he'd push himself harder, bury himself in more projects, chase every scholarship, join every club, all to outpace this gnawing sense of inadequacy. The more he struggled, the more drained he felt, and the more he questioned where God was in all of it. One evening, we sat down and talked about what it means to let God be God in our lives. Marcus broke down, admitting that he'd never actually prayed for direction. He'd never once paused in the chaos to say, "Lord, lead me." That night, he decided to start each day with prayer to see if this constant acknowledgement of God's sovereignty would shift his burdens. Over time, he told me his anxiety began to loosen its grip. He felt lighter, more focused, more confident, not because his life became perfect, but because he began to trust that no matter what came next, he was held in the hands of someone mightier than his fears. What about family? How does acknowledging God's oversight apply there? I can tell you from personal experience that no amount of professional success can heal the wounds in a family that lacks direction and unity. I have had moments in my own household where tension or miscommunication arose. It might be something small, a harsh word, a misunderstanding that balloons out of proportion, but those are the moments that test our humility. Do we double down on our pride? Or do we remember that our role as parents, spouses, siblings is under God's watchful eye? You see, God's sovereignty isn't just about grand gestures or major life decisions. It's about how we speak to one another, how we choose to love one another, even when we feel frustrated or misunderstood. In my household, I've watched God work miracles of reconciliation simply because we chose to pray together, to humble ourselves before the one who designed family in the first place. And let's talk about business or community leadership context. So many times, we separate our faith from our work as though the two occupy different universes. But if God is truly sovereign, there's no corner of your life that's off limits to his guidance. I've spoken to CEOs who, by the world's standards, have made it. They're on top. They've got the corner office, the big bank account, the recognition of their peers. Yet, behind closed doors, they'll look me in the eye and say, "I feel empty, Denzel. I've chased every external symbol of success, and it's never enough." And I always respond, have you invited God into your boardroom? Have you acknowledged him in your daily decisions? Because when you do, you start to see your employees, your clients, even your competitors differently. You see them as individuals worthy of respect and compassion, not just means to an end. You start making ethical decisions that reflect God's heart, not just your profit margin. And over time, you realize that true success isn't about rising to the top. It's about being faithful to the principles of the one who governs everything. Now, don't get me wrong. Acknowledging God's sovereignty is not a magic wand that erases every struggle. In fact, sometimes the acknowledgement brings challenges to the surface that God intends to refine us through. But here's the thing. Those challenges become stepping stones rather than stumbling blocks when we know who's ultimately in control. You can face financial hardships, health crises, or heartbreak and still keep your head above water, because that unshakable truth resides in your spirit. God sees, God knows, and God cares. We all have moments where that truth is tested. Maybe you're dealing with the heartbreak of a failed relationship or a family rift that hasn't healed. Maybe you're trying to climb out of debt, or you're battling an illness that has you questioning your future. These times can push us to the brink. We might question, Lord, if you're sovereign, why am I going through this valley? Let me tell you, I've been there. I know what it's like to stand in the gap between your faith and your fear, wondering which one is going to win out. When you stand there, that's precisely the moment to lean in further, to say, God, I don't understand, but I trust you. And trust, my friends, is the bedrock of acknowledging God's supremacy. You don't have to see the whole picture to take the next step. You just have to know the artist who's painting it. I remember one occasion very early on, when I was pursuing roles that didn't quite align with my spirit. I was so hungry for success, so desperate to prove myself, that I was willing to compromise certain values. But my mother, a woman of deep faith, reminded me of a verse, "To whom much is given, much is required." That verse is a double-edged sword. Yes, it means we're blessed with opportunities, but it also means we carry the responsibility to honor the giver of those opportunities. That day, I took a step back and asked, am I really acknowledging God if I'm pursuing something that goes against what I believe is right? From that moment on, I made a commitment that every role, every project, every venture needed to align not only with my talents, but with my faith. And you know what? Doors I never expected began to open. Directors and producers I didn't even know existed reached out. Roles I had never auditioned for came my way. It wasn't a coincidence. It was God's response to my willingness to honor him first. So often, we try to run the show ourselves, thinking we know what's best. But one of the greatest revelations you can have is that there's a difference between your plan and God's plan. Your plan might be good, but God's plan is always best. A good plan can keep you afloat, but God's plan can let you walk on water. When you truly submit your ambitions, your relationships, your life choices to his oversight, you align your actions with a supernatural current that carries you beyond what your limited vision can imagine. Now, how do we make this practical? How do we acknowledge God in a way that's not just lip service on Sunday, but a daily reality? First, start each day by giving thanks. It's so simple, yet so powerful. The moment you open your eyes, before you grab your phone or rush out the door, pause and say, Lord, thank you. Guide me today. That 5-second prayer is an anchor that reminds your soul who the real captain is. Next, surround yourself with people who also value God's sovereignty. We become like those we hang around. If your inner circle is filled with negativity or arrogance, it's going to rub off. But if you're surrounded by folks who humble themselves before the Lord, who celebrate His goodness, that mindset will become part of your lifestyle. Another practical step. Immerse yourself in scripture or spiritual teachings that remind you of who God is. You might listen to inspirational messages, read the Bible, or even meditate on verses during your break at work. It's not about checking a box, it's about filling your mind with truth so that when life storms hit, you won't be shaken off center. My father used to say, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And what greater stand to take than to proclaim that your life is under divine supervision? For the young folks listening, let me emphasize, this is not an old-fashioned message. Acknowledging God is timeless. You may think that your generation is too advanced, too technologically savvy to rely on something as traditional as faith. But consider this. The more advanced we become, the more we realize our vulnerabilities. Technology can fail, trends can fizzle, but God's sovereignty never goes out of style. Take it from someone who's seen the tides of popularity shift dozens of times in Hollywood. Today's headline is tomorrow's footnote. God, however, remains the same. His love, His wisdom, and His power are inexhaustible resources that no earthly invention can replicate. This applies to family life, too. When you lead a home that recognizes God's authority, you create a culture of honor and respect. It's not about being perfect. It's about acknowledging that you're all under one higher standard. When differences arise, you have a shared foundation to come back to, a place of unity that goes beyond personal pride. Couples who pray together, parents who instill faith in their children, these are the families that weather storms better. They might bend, but they don't break because they're rooted in something eternal. In the corporate or community arena, acknowledging God means operating with integrity, with compassion, and with a vision that serves the greater good rather than just your bottom line. I've known leaders who incorporate a moment of reflection or prayer before major decisions. They're not all preachers or religious zealots. They're simply individuals who recognize that sometimes the best moves come from pausing to consult a wisdom greater than their own. And you know what happens? They foster workplaces where employees feel valued, where ethical guidelines are respected, and where success is measured in more than dollars and cents. There's a truth that transcends personal gain. When we acknowledge God's sovereignty, we tap into a purpose that's not about us. Life becomes not just about what we can get, but what we can give, how we can serve, how we can impact others for good. That might sound lofty, but it's as real as the air we breathe. You see, real blessings are rarely meant for us alone. When God blesses you, He often does it so you can be a blessing to someone else. It's like being a conduit. The more you remain open to His flow, the more that blessing can pass through you to others. Try it sometime. Make a habit of saying, God, use me to help someone today, and watch how your perspective shifts. You'll start noticing needs you overlooked before. You'll find yourself going out of your way to assist others, and in doing so, you'll experience a deeper sense of fulfillment than any self-centered ambition can provide. Some might say, Denzel, I've tried acknowledging God, but I don't see the results. I'm still struggling. Let me tell you something about God's timing. It's rarely aligned with our impatience. There were roles I prayed for that I didn't get. There were moments I was convinced I was ready for the next big thing, but it never materialized. It's only in hindsight that I realized God was protecting me from certain pitfalls or preparing me for something better. A delayed blessing is not a denial. Sometimes it's just a matter of alignment, your character with your calling. God loves you too much to give you something that would destroy you or lead you away from Him. In those waiting seasons, keep acknowledging Him. Keep growing, keep praying, and keep believing. Eventually you'll look back and say, now I understand why I had to go through that. And remember, acknowledging God isn't just about seeking the blessings, it's about seeking the blesser. It's about relationship. The more you spend time with Him, the more you realize that he's not a distant monarch, but a loving father who desires intimacy with his children. He's not waiting to punish every mistake. He's waiting to guide, to correct lovingly, and to help you flourish in every dimension of your life. So when you stumble, and you will, don't run away in guilt or shame. Run toward him, because that's what acknowledging his sovereignty really looks like. A constant posture of humility, trust, and surrender. I recall a moment on set years ago, filming a particularly emotional scene. I was mentally exhausted, physically drained. Between takes, I found a quiet corner, bowed my head, and just whispered, "God, I need you." Instantly, a wave of calm washed over me. The tension eased, and I returned to the set with fresh energy and a sense of peace that had been missing. Could I have powered through on my own? Maybe, but it wouldn't have been the same. The performance wouldn't have had that depth. That's the difference God makes. He adds a layer of authenticity to everything you do, because when you're aligned with him, you're operating in truth rather than pretense. I want to underscore this for each of you. You have a unique purpose. It doesn't matter if you're an actor, a teacher, a mechanic, a student, or a stay-at-home parent. God designed you with specific gifts and a particular destiny. But you can't fully unlock that destiny if you're not willing to keep God at the center. It's like having a state-of-the-art car without the key. You can admire it, you can talk about it, you can even push it a short distance, but you'll never harness its full power until you insert that key and start the engine. Acknowledging God is that key. It ignites the divine purpose coded into your very being. Let's circle back to the struggles we face in our community. We see turmoil, injustice, and division on so many levels. People cry out for change, for hope, for leadership that can unify rather than tear apart. But too often we rely on human agendas and fleeting ideologies. What if our communities collectively acknowledged God's sovereignty? What if we humbled ourselves enough to say, "We can't fix this mess alone. We need divine intervention"? That's where real transformation begins. It starts in our hearts and ripples outward into how we treat each other, how we cast our votes, how we volunteer and invest in local initiatives. When we let God define our values, we become agents of healing and progress in a world that desperately needs both. Now, I'm not suggesting a passive approach. Acknowledging God doesn't mean you sit back and do nothing. Quite the contrary. It means you act, but you act under guidance. You become proactive in love, in service, in standing up for what's right. You become a catalyst for good, fueled by the knowledge that your strength comes from a source that never runs dry. This is true power. Not power in the worldly sense of dominance or control, but power in the spiritual sense of having a wellspring of faith that can move mountains. Some of you might be wondering, how do I know if I'm actually submitting to God's sovereignty and not just following my own agenda? A good litmus test is peace. When you're truly trusting God, even in the face of adversity, you sense a peace that defies circumstances. It doesn't mean you won't feel pressure or stress, but it means you won't be consumed by them. You'll find clarity in chaos, strength in weakness. Another sign is humility. When you acknowledge God, you recognize that every gift, every success, and every breath is a result of His grace. You don't puff yourself up, you lift Him up. Let's take a quick moment right now, just a moment in your own heart, to reflect. Ask yourself, in which areas of my life have I claimed control? Where have I edged God out? Have I been quick to pat myself on the back and slow to give Him the glory? You don't have to answer out loud, but if you feel a tug in your spirit, that's the Holy Spirit nudging you. That's an invitation to surrender those areas back to God. And when you do, watch how He heals, restores, and multiplies whatever you place in His hands. I also want to speak to those who have felt disillusioned by religion or by people who claim to speak for God. Sometimes the very institutions meant to guide us can falter, leaving us hurt or confused. But don't confuse human failings with divine perfection. The presence of hypocrites doesn't nullify the reality of God. We're all imperfect vessels, and none of us can replicate his purity. So if you've been wounded by hypocrisy, I urge you not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. God is still real, still good, and still sovereign, regardless of those who misrepresent him. Turn your eyes back to him and let him show you who he truly is. And to those who feel unworthy, who think, "Why would God care about me? I'm too messed up, too far gone." Let me be the first to tell you, that's a lie. There's no pit so deep that God's love can't reach you. Scripture says, where sin abounded, grace did much more abound. That means there's more than enough grace for you. Yes, you. God's sovereignty includes the power to forgive, to mend broken hearts, and to create beauty out of ashes. If you're living in shame, thinking you're not good enough for God, I encourage you to open your heart anyway. Acknowledging his oversight starts with a simple confession, "Lord, I need you." That's it. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to be open. I think about the countless testimonies I've heard from folks who hit rock bottom, addictions, jail time, broken families, and yet, when they finally acknowledged God's authority, their lives took a dramatic turn. I have seen hardened hearts become soft and compassionate. I've seen broken relationships restored. I've seen people find a sense of calling they never knew existed. And it all started with humbly inviting God into their situation, daily reminding themselves that he is Lord, not just in heaven, but in their personal lives, their finances, their dreams, their failures, and their future. Let me drive this point home with a story that's very close to my heart. A friend of mine was battling a severe health crisis. The doctors weren't optimistic, and he had every reason to despair. But instead, each morning had opened his eyes and say, "Lord, I trust you. Whether I live or die, I trust you. You are sovereign over every cell in my body." Day after day, that was his prayer. And he told me that even though his body was weak, his spirit felt stronger than ever. In time, his condition improved in ways the doctors couldn't fully explain. They called it remission. He called it a miracle. But even more remarkable than his physical healing was the transformation of his attitude. He found joy and contentment in the midst of his trial, simply because he believed that God was in control. That's the power of continual acknowledgement. It doesn't guarantee a pain-free life, but it guarantees a life anchored in hope and fortified by faith. As you absorb this, consider your own situation, your own challenge. Maybe your issue isn't health. Maybe it's heartbreak, or fear, or financial strain, or a deep longing for purpose. Whatever it is, place it under God's sovereignty. Don't just do it once, do it continually. Make it a daily habit, an hourly habit, if you must. Instead of letting anxiety run rampant in your mind, replace it with a moment of prayer, a moment of remembrance. God, you're bigger than this. You're in control. You're in control. Over time, watch how your spirit calms, how solutions present themselves, and how your perspective shifts from what you lack to what he can do. I often say that my life story is a tapestry woven with threads of grace. Every chapter has God's fingerprints all over it. From the early days when I was just a dreamer with a prayer to the latter days of experiencing success and still needing that daily dose of divine wisdom. My story isn't unique. It's available to each of us because God is not a respecter of persons. If he can guide me through the ups and downs of this industry, if he can anchor my family through storms, if he can redirect my path when I've gone astray, he can do the same for you. As I look out at you tonight, I see hope written on your faces. I see questions and maybe some flickers of doubt. But I also see hearts ready to believe, ready to step into a new level of faith. And I want to encourage you not to let this moment pass you by. Acknowledge God right here, right now. Whisper it under your breath. Lord, I need you. I trust you. I believe you are sovereign. It might feel awkward if you've never done it before, but that simple confession can shift your entire trajectory. Because when we open ourselves to God, He rushes in with loving arms, ready to reshape our narratives in ways we never thought possible. Let me recap why this matters. We've traveled through personal reflections, youth stories, family anecdotes, and business insights. The common thread is that no corner of life is off limits to God's sovereign hand. If you want to invite boundless blessings, and I mean blessings that go far beyond just money or fleeting success, then your heart posture must be one of continual recognition. Not a one-time nod or an occasional prayer when you're in trouble, but a lifestyle of saying, God, I see you. I honor you. I welcome you. This daily choice changes everything. It changes how you approach adversity. It changes how you treat people. It changes how you spend your time, your money, and your energy. It changes you from the inside out, molding you into the kind of person who not only receives blessings, but becomes a blessing. If you've followed along this far, I believe you're ready to take a bold step. I believe you're on the verge of a breakthrough, not just in one area of your life, but in your entire outlook. Maybe it's time you start that initiative you've been too afraid to pursue because you weren't sure how it would all pan out. Maybe it's time you forgive that family member you've been estranged from for years, trusting that God can heal wounds you thought were permanent. Or maybe it's time you take a leap of faith in your career, believing that God has gone ahead of you to prepare the way. Whatever it is, don't hold back. Trust that when God guides you, He also provides for you. When you leave here tonight, or when you turn off this video, the real work begins. You'll face the same world, the same bills, the same responsibility. But you will be different because you'll have a fresh revelation of who God is and how He longs to be involved in every part of your life. That's the essence of continual acknowledgement. We keep the door open. We stay in conversation with Him. And in doing so, we keep ourselves ready to receive, ready to act, and ready to be used mightily for His purposes. I want you to picture, just for a moment, what your life could look like a year from now if you chose to live with this God-first mentality every single day. Imagine the peace you'd carry through challenges, the clarity you'd bring to decisions, and the influence you'd have on the people around you. Envision yourself more patient, more courageous, more loving, and more certain that no matter what comes your way, you are never alone. That vision can be your reality starting today. But it hinges on that key decision. Will you acknowledge God's sovereign oversight continually? That's your call to action. Make it a habit. Don't wait for perfection or for some grand spectacle. Invite God into your mess, your imperfections, your daily grind. Invite Him into your celebrations and your sorrows. And watch how He transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. You might find that the simplest moments, a sunrise, a conversation with a friend, a smile from a stranger, become profound reminders of His presence. You might find that the heaviest burdens become lighter because you're no longer carrying them alone. And you might find that your greatest fears dissolve in the light of His truth. So as I wrap this up, let me speak from my heart. You matter to God. Your dreams, your struggles, your questions, they all matter. And He is big enough, loving enough, and powerful enough to handle them. Don't limit yourself by ignoring the one who is limitless. Give God the space to show up and show off His goodness in your life. I promise you, when you do, you will discover blessings that have no boundary. Peace, purpose, fulfillment, joy, and yes, even material provisions that align with His plan for you. But the greatest blessing, the one that surpasses all, is the deep, abiding knowledge that you belong to Him and that He is with you always. I feel in my spirit that some of you are right on the edge of a transformation. You've come here seeking answers, or maybe you stumbled upon this message by chance. Either way, it's no coincidence. God is calling you to a higher plane of living, a spiritual elevation where you see life through the lens of His sovereignty. Will you answer that call? Will you let go of trying to control every outcome and let Him lead? I can't do that for you. Your neighbor can't do it for you. Only you can open that door and say, "Lord, come in." If you're ready, I invite you to take a step of faith right where you are. Just say, "Yes, God." Whisper it, say it in your heart, or shout it out loud. I don't mind how you do it, as long as you mean it. That's your turning point, the moment you align yourself with a power that has no limits. And from this moment on, strive to live in that acknowledgement daily. Keep feeding your soul with truths that remind you of His greatness. Stay connected with a faith community that helps you grow. Seek out mentors and friends who will challenge you to remain consistent. And never underestimate the power of prayer. Talk to God like you would talk to a loving Father who wants the best for you, because that's exactly who He is. Now, as I close, I want to leave you with a final charge. Don't let your faith remain a private affair. Let it shine through your actions. Let it guide how you treat people, how you handle setbacks, how you celebrate victories. Let it be the driving force behind your dreams and your decisions. Let it be the gentle whisper that tells you to keep going when the road gets tough. And let it be the reason you look in the mirror each day and say, "I am blessed, and I am a blessing," because you are. And as you continually acknowledge God's sovereign oversight, your life will bear fruit that speaks louder than any sermon I could ever preach. It will be a living testimony, a beacon of light, pointing people back to the source of all truth and love. I thank you for lending me your ears and your hearts. I trust that what you've heard tonight will sink deep and produce a harvest in your life. Let's walk away from this moment determined to live differently, to live courageously, and to live with our eyes fixed on the one who holds it all together. May God bless you richly. May He guide your steps, and may He reveal Himself to you in ways that surpass your wildest imagination. Embrace this journey, and know that as you continually acknowledge Him, you're not only inviting blessings into your life, you're stepping into the destiny He designed uniquely for you. Now, go forth with confidence and with the unshakable assurance that God is indeed in control. Amen.